Hello and welcome to Session 2, Hours 3 and 4 of the Mississippi Dyslexia Awareness Training. Today we will cover the dyslexia policy and practice that guides our work. Here is the vision and mission of the board. So our vision is to create a world-class educational system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce, and to flourish as parents and citizens. Our mission is to provide leadership through the development of policy and accountability systems so that all students are prepared to compete in the global community. Here are our 6 strategic plan goals. Number 1, all students proficient and showing growth in all assessed areas. 2, every student graduates from high school and is ready for college and career. 3, every child has access to a high-quality early childhood program. 4, every school has effective teachers and leaders. 5, every community effectively uses a world-class data system to improve student outcomes. And 6, every school and district is rated C or higher. And at the intervention office, we see where we fit into all 6 of these goals. Here is the agenda that we will be covering for the next 2 hours. We will review dyslexia evaluations, MTSS and interventions, accommodations and adaptations, scholarships, grants, and additional considerations when we discuss our students with dyslexia. We recommend that you have the necessary time to interact with these final 2 hours of the video series. Be sure that you have your Session 2 handout ready, along with a pen or a pencil. You may watch this video individually or with a group, whichever works best for you. My name is Laurie Weathersby. I am a licensed dyslexia therapist, a certified academic language therapist. I'm also the Bureau Director of the Office of Intervention Services at the Mississippi Department of Education, with over 20 years experience in education. And with me today, I have Jada Brantley, who is also a licensed dyslexia therapist, a certified academic language therapist. She is an academic intervention specialist at the department with over 25 years in education. Here is the legislation that requires school districts to conduct 4 hours of awareness training for dyslexia and other related disorders to all licensed educators and paraprofessionals responsible for instruction. And in the first 2 hours, we covered the knowledge and practice standards that are required in the training. And so today we're just going to be expanding on the information that we shared in those first 2 hours, plus giving you some additional information around dyslexia and those additional related disorders. So first, we would like to cover dyslexia evaluations. The word evaluation encompasses several things. It encompasses identification, screening, testing, and also diagnosis. It includes all information gathered from the family, the school, and outside professionals who know that student. The evaluations must be conducted by a licensed psychologist, licensed psychometrist, or a licensed speech pathologist, and that is according to the Mississippi legislations. Districts must accept a diagnosis from any of the individuals listed above. If you receive an evaluation from a parent and you're not sure if it was conducted by one of these professionals, feel free to reach out to our office and we can help you with that. So we're going to review several evaluation components. Evaluations should contain a number of the following components. The evaluation that you receive may not contain all of these components, but should contain most. One of the areas that we look for is an IQ test, and that can be a nonverbal or a verbal assessment, rapid automatic naming, reading fluency, letter word identification, reading comprehension, passage comprehension, word reading, oral reading, word attack, written expression with writing samples, vocabulary knowledge, spelling, encoding, phonological awareness, oral expression, phonological memory, and finally, listening comprehension. And like I said, the evaluations you get may not cover all of these, but should cover most of those main areas. So when we're looking at the components of a dyslexia evaluation, the evaluations might not contain every single component listed. However, they should provide enough documentation to determine if dyslexia is present. And one thing you may hear people refer to is called a battery of tests. So when you hear that, that's what they're referring to. They're referring to multiple components. So here are a few assessment names that you may see in a dyslexia report. So you have probably heard of the CTOP. There's also the Linda Mood auditory conceptualization test, the test of auditory analysis skills, the Woodcock-Johnson, the Texas Primary Reading Inventory, the Phonological Awareness Test, or you may have heard of it as the PAT, the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, Decoding Skills Test. There's also the Wide Range Intelligence Test, the Gray Oral Reading Test, you've probably heard of it referred to as the GORT, the Test of Word Reading Efficiency, or the TOWER, and then finally the Oral and Written Language Scales, the OWLs. Districts independently decide the process for assessing students who are suspected of having dyslexia, and the process may vary from district to district. Each district should have procedures in place for addressing parent requests for testing. And just keep in mind that when you are receiving an outside evaluation, that you're looking for it to be completed by one of the three professionals that we mentioned, and then you're also going to be looking for that battery of tests. And so these are some of the names that you may see. Of course, we do not have them all listed here for you. There are, multiple, there are many more, but just keep in mind that this is just to give you an idea of some assessments that you may notice and that may be used in the dyslexia testing. Okay, so now is an opportunity for you to pause the video and answer the question and discuss the answers with your team if you are working with a team today. So let's look at your question. And so this will be found on your handout, section A at the top. List 3 individuals from which Mississippi public school districts must accept a diagnosis of dyslexia. So take a minute and write down those answers. Okay, we are now going to play a video from a parent's perspective.
My name is Shelly Darby, and my daughter Lakeland Darby was diagnosed with dyslexia at the beginning of her 3rd grade year. Lakeland always loved to be read to, but I began to feel in my gut that something was unusual as she was learning to read, because she would often skip words and became very anxious and unable to sit still when we were reading at home. I could not understand why a child that was so smart would dislike reading as much as she did. Reading became a little chore every single day. Lakeland passed standardized screeners for dyslexia in 1st and 2nd grade, but I just knew in my heart that something was wrong. So I spoke with a coworker who had a child with dyslexia and was given the contact information for Mississippi College. We went for testing and were formally diagnosed at that point. It was like a weight was immediately lifted off of both of us. Just knowing the why for her struggle was such a turning point. At that point, we contacted her school to discuss the diagnosis with them and initiated a 504 plan for Lakeland. Thankfully, she's able to participate in dyslexia therapy at school 4 days a week. We've learned that teacher understanding and involvement is crucial, and we've been so blessed that each of Lakeland's teachers have been very gracious to work with her and use the accommodations as needed, but not to allow them to become a crutch. Homework is definitely a struggle, as kids with dyslexia already have had to work so hard during the day just to keep up. Lakeland is often very tired when it comes time for homework, but nonetheless, she perseveres. We use Quizlet quite a bit to increase repetitions when studying vocabulary terms, and we often do her reading together. Although it can be challenging, Lakeland does very well and excels in conceptual thought, reasoning, creativity, and problem solving. Lakeland's therapist actually recommended the book, The Gift of Dyslexia, when she was initially diagnosed, and I think we can all agree that we're finally to a point that it truly is a beautiful gift. My name.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jada, and she is going to talk to you about how dyslexia and MTSS work together.
Okay. You all are familiar with MTSS. It stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. Dyslexia is part of our MTSS framework, as our students with dyslexia are all Tier 1 students who are receiving that high quality core instruction. What is MTSS? It's a framework for effective team-based problem solving. It is data-informed, evidence-based, and flexible enough to meet the academic and the behavioral needs of all of our students. So when we discuss the flexibility of MTSS, basically the process allows districts and schools to make decisions in order to meet the needs of their students while considering their resources, so that implementation is carried out with fidelity and it's sustainable. So these are the components of MTSS. So all of these components work together in order for MTSS to be successful. And notice that these components are surrounded by academics and behavior. So one of the components is shared leadership, which sometimes we will refer to as our TST, that teacher support team. Universal screening and progress monitoring for both behavior and academics. And we know that K through 3 our K through 3 buildings have required screeners that have been approved by the State Board of Education, and our 4 through 12 schools utilize some of the same types of screeners, but they also utilize state testing, absence reports, information regarding office referrals, outside testing is something we look at. So there are so many things for those upper grades to utilize that can be considered part of their universal screening process. So if you are a 4 through 12 school and you do not have a universal screener per se that you have purchased, you can utilize some data that you already have. Evidence-based interventions is one of the components. Family, school, and community partnerships, very important when working with students with dyslexia, that we have partnerships with the family. Layered continuum of supports is a component that encompasses Tier 1, Tier 2, that supplemental instruction, and Tier 3, that most intensive support. And then the last component we have is data-based problem solving and decision making. So the team uses all of the data that is available to make actionable decisions and to implement effective intervention and instruction. What is MTSS? Well, it is a framework for effective problem solving to improve academics and behavioral outcomes for all students. So it doesn't matter if the student has some other type of label attached to them, such as SPED or gifted, or an English learner, or a student who receives speech services. Intervention in MTSS is for all students. It's not a single curriculum or a single program. So there are many working parts that make up the MTSS framework. It is for all students, including those who need enrichment. It's not just for struggling students. It is flexible, again, that word flexible, to meet the unique needs of districts and schools. It's not one size fits all. Students move fluidly across the tiers in MTSS, so it's not really based on a prescribed timeline. It is data informed and evidence based. It's not based on assumptions. It is collaborative and team-based decision making. So one person is not going to be responsible for making these decisions regarding intervention for students. It is going to be a team making decisions. It's a framework to make decisions about the need for further services. It's not a pre-referral services. It's not a pre-referral process. So with MTSS, supports are constantly evolving so that the most adequate supports are put in place for students. We have an intervention policy, the State Board Policy 41.1. It outlines what must be done regarding interventions and clarifies what Mississippi schools do in order to support student needs. The purpose is behavioral and academic needs of every student will be met or are met through a tiered instructional model. Every school district will follow the instructional model, which consists of 3 tiers of instruction. Tier 1, quality classroom instruction based on Mississippi curriculum frameworks. Tier 2, focused supplemental instruction. And Tier 3, intensive interventions specifically designed to meet the individual needs of students. So while we are discussing these components of the State Board policy, I just wanted to add that in Mississippi, Tier 2 is usually carried out by classroom teachers. There are some districts that we know have an interventionist who handles the Tier 2. Those are definitely decisions that are made by districts. Tier 3, that intensive support, in some schools, they do have an interventionist who carries out Tier 3 intervention. Some districts have a dyslexia therapist who provides therapy to students, and that is considered the Tier 3 intervention. And then there are districts who have their teacher who is responsible for carrying out those Tier 3 interventions. As part of the state board policy, it states that interventions will be designed to address the deficit areas. So we have to make sure that when we create an intervention plan that we are focusing on those areas of weakness. Interventions will be evidence-based. So these interventions should have some evidence out there providing results that provide results of student progress and outcomes. Interventions must be implemented as designed by the TST, and also we want them implemented with fidelity and integrity. Interventions should be supported by data regarding the effectiveness of the intervention. And of course, after implementation, we continue to refine practices according to the data to create more effective and efficient interventions. When determining intervention supports, while the law specifically states that intervention strategies and accommodations must be provided to enable the student to achieve appropriate educational progress, the interventions and strategies are determined locally. So they are determined at the district and school level. Intensity, frequency, and duration of instruction or intervention should correspond to the degree of dyslexia for students. So think about it on like a continuing scale. Students might have mild dyslexia, moderate, or severe dyslexia. So we need to consider the severeness of the dyslexia as we create those intervention plans. We need to also consider that students with dyslexia are often inconsistent. These inconsistencies can create serious challenges for some of our students. I know from my experience working with students with dyslexia, no two people with dyslexia have the exact same issues or react to treatment or therapy in exactly the same way. When we create interventions, we need to consider, is dyslexia the primary disability? Are there comorbid disorders? So is dyslexia the overriding disability that most clearly expresses itself? All right, we're going to pause for a moment as you guys look at session handout 2 or session 2 handout, and you're going to be on question B. Who is responsible for creating and implementing an intervention plan for a student with dyslexia? At this moment, you can pause and discuss your question and answers with your team. Okay, when progress monitoring students who have dyslexia, we can use our progress monitoring from dyslexia therapy or from our tiered intervention. In dyslexia therapy, we have benchmark assessments that can be utilized, but also we might want to include some text passages that cover the skills that have been covered in therapy. And also you could utilize grade level oral reading fluency passages and count words per minute correct. You might have more than one piece of progress monitoring that you're utilizing. You're going to utilize those classroom, formative, and summative assessments because you want to see if the therapy or the intervention is, let's say, rolling over into what's happening in the classroom, if it is having some effect on those classroom assessments as well. We're going to use screeners and benchmark assessments, state test results, and then if we have any progress checks that are available from other sources, maybe there are other teachers who work with the student, maybe there's progress checks that the EL teacher utilizes, the SPED teacher, or other outside people who work with the student. If they have assessments that are applicable, we would use those as well. Okay, let's discuss a child find study. So let's think about it for a moment. Who serves students with dyslexia? Because some students who have dyslexia will have an IEP in place. Not all students with dyslexia will have an IEP in place. And consider that in Mississippi, dyslexia does fall under general education. So we get this question a good bit about who will serve these students. So let's think about, there are students with an IEP, students without an IEP. So it might be the special education teacher serving those students who did qualify for special services. The dyslexia therapist may also serve students who qualified for special services. So the dyslexia therapist may serve or might be serving students who are both gen ed and special education. The interventionist, she or he, may also serve those students who are special education or general education. Classroom teachers, other outside professionals. So basically the team, the TST, discusses who do we have who is the most qualified to provide services for our students with dyslexia. In some cases, if the student does have an IEP, that SPED teacher and that dyslexia therapist are working hand in hand as well. And also dyslexia therapist and interventionist working hand in hand. And what is a Child Find Study? It's the ongoing obligation to identify, locate, and evaluate all children suspected of disabilities who need special education and a result of those disabilities. A district should not violate its Child Find duty by repeatedly referring a student for interventions rather than evaluating the student's need for special education and related services. So in other words, we shouldn't just falter back each time to, well, the child is receiving intervention services, the child is receiving intervention services. We really have to look at that data and look at the growth and see, is the child growing in intervention? When considering a child for an IEP, of course, before we move forward to a comprehensive evaluation, the multidisciplinary evaluation team meets, and this team uses data to make informed decisions regarding whether or not a student needs to move on to receive a comprehensive evaluation. So when the MET is looking at the data, if the student has dyslexia, then they do need to consider the amount of time that the student has been in therapy or in intervention, because sometimes students with dyslexia are growing, but maybe they're not growing at a fast pace. So we do have to consider the time spent in intervention and if there is growth and how quickly that growth is occurring. If we have a MET meeting and the team decides not to move forward with testing, the IEP door is still open for future considerations of eligibility. So it's not a one and done deal. And sometimes parents do think that if they have a MET meeting and if the MET team or if the MET does not move forward for testing, then that's it. Their child will not be tested, will not receive a comprehensive evaluation. So help them to understand that that door is never closed. Okay, let's look at our Session 2 handout, Part C. Who should serve a student with dyslexia? And at this moment, if you need to pause your video to discuss the question and the answer with your team, you may do so. All right, I am going to hand over the computer to Laurie. Laurie is going to talk about allowable supports.
Okay. There are many allowable accommodations for our students with dyslexia. So we are going to start by looking at those accommodations on state assessments. This information pertains to students with a documented diagnosis of dyslexia on file. that were evaluated by a licensed psychologist, psychometrist, or speech language pathologist. And here is the Mississippi Code that gives that information. So if you would like to go back and find that, that is where you can locate it. There may be other accommodations that are needed as related to a student's disability. So if you have questions about that, here is the link to the Mississippi Testing Accommodations Manual. That's where you can find additional information. So be sure you look for the 2017 edition. That is where we added the information for our students with dyslexia. So here are the state assessments that can utilize the extended time accommodation. And so here is the Mississippi Academic Assessment Program, or MAP. And you see here it covers ELA and math for grades 3 through 8, English 2, and Algebra 1. It covers the MAP Science, grades 5 and 8, and Biology 1. And then the MAP US History Test. It also is for our students that are in 3rd grade, taking that 3rd grade assessment. That also is provided for them, that extended time accommodation. And I'll explain that, what exactly that accommodation is, in just a moment. The ACT also can give extended time, but with the ACT, be sure that you reach out to the ACT company so you are aware of what they require for accommodations, because they are their own private company. You want to make sure you reach out to them and see what they require as far as paperwork or documentation. And then finally, the English language proficiency test can also utilize this extended time. So here are those testing accommodations that are allowable for our students. And you see here across the top, it has them listed out: the MAP, the MCAS, which is for our 3rd grade students, the ACT, and the ELPT. So the accommodation numbers that we're looking for are 20 and 23, which is extended time until the end of the school day. 24, administer the test over several sessions and specifying the duration of each session. And then finally, 25, administer the test over several days, specifying the duration of each day's sessions. Here is the documentation form that should be used for this. This is on our MDE website. If you go to the student assessment page under documentation, under resources, you will see it on the right-hand side of the page. You will see this form. So schools should retain the student's dyslexia diagnosis in the classroom and in the cumulative record. You may not put the complete diagnosis in the cumulative record. That is fine. If you just want to put a summary sheet that states that the student does have a diagnosis of dyslexia, that will cover it. We know a lot of school districts don't put that formal diagnosis report in the cumulative file. You also need to complete the Mississippi Testing Accommodation for Students with Dyslexia form that I just shared with you. And you want to keep that form in the classroom where the child is taking the assessment and in the cumulative record, okay? So you will have their diagnosis on file in the classroom along with this form, and then in the cumulative record you will have this form, and then you will also have that copy of their diagnosis. And remember, I said you can use the summary sheet to go in there, so you don't have those testing scores in that file. That's completely up to your district how y'all maintain those records. So I just want to remind you on this one, before we move on to classroom supports, that all the student needs is a diagnosis of dyslexia to receive these accommodations on state test. They do not require an IEP or a 504. So if you have any questions about that, if you have a student and maybe you're not sure, just reach out to us at the office and we can help you work through that paperwork. Okay, so now looking at classroom supports. First, we know that our students with dyslexia benefit from a multi-sensory teaching approach where we are looking at all of the modalities: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile. So teaching using all of these learning pathways in the brain simultaneously or sequentially in order to enhance their memory and their learning. So this is part of dyslexia therapy, and many interventions, different intervention programs, also use this approach. The Access for All guide is also located on the MDE website, and we have a new updated version. So we call it Access for All Guide 2.0. It ensures equal access as students work toward grade level standards. It provides adaptations for all students. There are allowable adaptations that might not be listed in the AFA 2.0. Of course, we could not cover everything, but we tried to give teachers a good idea of what is allowable in the classroom when we think about accommodations. So what is in the Access for All guide? So it is really, if you are a classroom teacher and you have not explored the Access for All guide, I would strongly recommend that you take the opportunity and do that. It covers academic, physical, speech language, social, emotional, behavioral, and organizational strategies. And so within that, it also covers ADHD and dyslexia. And so it has those specific areas covered, and it just provides districts with instructional implementation strategies and supports for our struggling learners. So like I said, if you have not explored that, take the time and set some time aside, maybe in your group planning, to do that, and you will see all of the accommodations, the allowable accommodations that are available to our students. And many times you will see that there are things that you're already doing in the classroom. And so, so it may not be new information for you. It may just be a refresher. So this is just an important note that we like to share with our schools and districts about adaptations. So be careful of the number of accommodations that are implemented. We want to implement those supports that students feel comfortable utilizing and will utilize correctly. So for many of our students, we will just kind of give them a plethora of accommodations, and sometimes it's too much, it's overwhelming. So we really need to find the accommodations that are most appropriate for our students. We want them to feel that success, and then over time, hopefully we can pull back some of that support so they can be more independent. So we just like to put that note in there about those accommodations. So when we're determining the appropriate supports for our students, we know that those classroom supports should be determined locally. We want to provide them to the students so they can achieve their appropriate educational progress. And those supports are allowable for all students when they need it. So if they're at the Tier 1 level, the Tier 2 or Tier 3 level, if they need some assistance, we are going to provide that to get them on track and get them where they need to be. And then, of course, it's always driven by data. Look at all of your available data and see where we can provide some of that assistance, provide that support to get them where they need to be so they can be successful in the classroom. So when we look specifically at supporting our students with dyslexia, we know that we need to teach them time management skills. They need organizational skills, advocacy skills. So we want our students to be able to manage their time appropriately. Many of our students really struggle with that. They don't have the understanding of a timeline. So that is something that we need to teach them specifically. The same for organizational skills. They don't understand that automatically. We need to teach that to them explicitly. And then advocacy skills. So our students, a lot of times our students have amazing parents that will come to the school and advocate on behalf of their child. But as they're getting older, we need to teach them those skills independently so they can advocate for themselves. And then, of course, we want to model those expectations and utilize visuals as much as what you can. So model what you expect out of your students, provide visuals as needed. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Jada, and she's going to talk to you about morphological instruction.
Okay, morphological instruction is instruction that can be utilized, of course, at the Tier 1 level. That's good, solid teaching at the Tier 1 level, but it is also something that can be utilized at the Tier 2 or Tier 3 level. Morphological awareness enhances students' existing skills by providing them with an additional tool to use when they encounter a challenging word. So research does support that instruction in morphology is very beneficial for students as far as showing growth with fluency, spelling, comprehension, decoding. It's powerful in many ways. We sort of thought that morphological awareness or morphological instruction was something that occurred, as students get a little bit older, fifth grade maybe, middle school, but studies have really shown these last few years that we shouldn't wait that long to begin morphological instruction. We should begin integrating it with our younger students because it's a key component for those kids who are beginning to read and write. Again, it provides a powerful tool for improving literacy. So by studying word parts, students begin to recognize the presence of morphemes. And as they recognize those morphemes, they understand and use word parts that they didn't previously understand. And they understand the significance of these word parts and how word parts work together. So again, this is something that can be beneficial for decoding, especially those multisyllabic words. For comprehension, because students really learn how to break those words apart and utilize those parts of the word that they know the meaning to predict when they're comprehending. And then also spelling or encoding of complex words, because understanding those morphemes helps them when they are learning specific spelling rules to know when to apply rules and how those rules are utilized. Some activities that can be done, and this is very simplistic, these 4 examples: word sorting, breaking words apart, creating words, or manipulating existing words to make new words from those parts. All of this, again, is very powerful for students with dyslexia. Okay, we are going to watch a short video clip from a teacher to get some input on working with students with dyslexia.
Hi, my name is Larbeth Jackson, and I am a first grade ELA teacher at Anderson Elementary School in Boonville, Mississippi. Today, I would like to take a little time to talk to you about a special type of learner that we often see in our first grade classrooms, and they are children who have dyslexia. As a classroom teacher, there are several signs that you can look for when you are evaluating and screening your children at the beginning of the school year. So the first thing that I like to do at the beginning of the school year is to do a phonemic awareness assessment to see if my first graders have that foundation in phonemic awareness before we begin teaching phonics and spelling and everything that goes along with that. So during a phonemic awareness assessment, the things that I like to look for are letter recognition, sound recognition, the ability to produce a rhyme, as well as tell if a set of words do rhyme or if they do not rhyme. I also like to see if the students can segment sounds. If I can give them a word, a CVC word, and they can tell me all of the sounds in that word. I also like to see if the children can blend sounds together to produce a word. So I will give them a set of 3 sounds, and they will tell me the word that we have produced. Children who do struggle with dyslexia will have a harder time being able to have those letters and sounds stick in their brains, so they may struggle with that activity. It is hard for them to produce rhyming words or the end rhyme in a set of words. And of course, blending and segmenting is going to be very difficult for them as well. So, as a classroom teacher, when I see that children are struggling with those activities at the beginning of the year, obviously they do not have a solid foundation in phonemic awareness. So, they are not ready to move on to phonics and learning to spell and read words. So, the first step in helping these children to attain a foundation in phonemic awareness would obviously be to pull them and work with them on these skills as much as you possibly can. And I know being a classroom teacher, finding that time to do one-on-one activity is a little more challenging, but ensuring that these children who have dyslexia have that foundation is of the utmost importance, because they are not going to be successful in reading and writing until that foundation is built and it is solid. Another red flag you need to look for when you are evaluating students' foundation in phonemic awareness, phonics, and spelling is that students are throwing red flags whenever they begin reading words or spelling words. Dyslexic children tend, just like with the phonemic awareness activities, they struggle blending and segmenting words. And when it is time to begin reading words, obviously blending is the key to that. So when students who are dyslexic begin blending words, a classroom teacher will typically see that those children have a hard time holding on to that beginning sound. If they are trying to sound out the word cat, and most children will be able to say at, but when they tell you the word, they will either say at, or they will replace that beginning sound with another letter, such as bat or mat. Also, when students are segmenting words for spelling, which is very important in first grade, when we are typing out the sounds that we hear in words, students can oftentimes type out every sound that they hear in a word. But when it comes time to take it from their brain and put it on paper, they often struggle with, again, that beginning sound. And a lot of times they struggle being able to identify what vowel goes in the middle of that word. When you come to blends and digraphs, even though a digraph is one sound, if it's at the beginning of a word, dyslexic children are really going to struggle with remembering and being able to apply the sound that goes at the beginning of that word to spell it. As a classroom teacher, there are several tools that we can give students who struggle with dyslexia to help them in the classroom. The first thing is when you are doing any kind of word work or phonics work in your classroom, especially when you're spelling, give them hands-on activities using Play-Doh to spell words or using colorful pens to spell words are just two simple things that you can do in a classroom to really help those sounds stick in a child's mind. Another tool that you can use is to just get a strip of laminated colored paper, and when you're reading something, have those children put that, we call it a tracker, put that tracker underneath the line that they are reading. That way, that's all that their brains can focus on. When you give dyslexic children a sheet full of words and full of questions and things to do, their brain automatically goes into overdrive. That's a lot of information for them, and a lot of dyslexic children cannot handle that. So giving them a tool to where they can cover up everything except for exactly what they need to be focusing on will really help them to stay calm and to put their focus on exactly what you want them to be doing at that certain moment in time. The last thing that I would like to focus on is just making sure that you as a classroom teacher understand that dyslexic children are going to be just as successful as all of the other children in your classroom. These children are able to learn and they are able to read and they are able to spell. We as classroom teachers just have to give them the tools that they need in order to be successful. I know right now being a classroom teacher is very hard. Managing your classroom, finding time to do whole group and small group instruction, and deciding what children need to be pulled to work on what specific skills. I get that. It is hard, especially with the time that we are in right now. But I want to encourage you that even though these children may really struggle at the beginning, there is hope for them if you will use little tools that you have in the classroom, such as Play-Doh and just colored pens or crayons or markers, to make word work and spelling and segmenting sounds a little bit easier. These children, they will eventually catch on. It takes them a little bit longer, but that's fine. We have the entire school year to get them to where they are able to blend words together and take them apart and into their different sounds. So don't be stressed out, don't get frustrated, hang in there, and together we can make a really big difference with these children.
Okay, so on our next slide, we have, it's coming up, there it is. Okay, so look at the bottom of your session 2 handout, and we have 2 questions for you. Which students are allowed to receive classroom adaptations, accommodations? So take a minute and think which students may receive those. And then E, what type of instruction is best for students with dyslexia? So you can pause the video and go back into the slides and find those answers if you would like. And then we're also going to conclude the first hour of this series. So this is actually hour 3, and we're going to stop the recording now. And so if you also need to take a break, feel free to do that. And then we will pick back up in hour 4.